All right, welcome to the Gopherwood Lounge. I am Arc Press Senior Editor DJ Dave Butler. Come on in out of the rain. Before we get started with my super interesting guest today, I want to remind you to like the video, hit the notification bell, subscribe to the channel, go to arc.press and follow us by signing up to our mailing list and follow us at arc_press on X as well. All of the traditional things. Um, Today I'm here with John Bucher. Very excited to be talking to John. I met him at the at an event called the Dignity Summit of all things a few weeks ago in Salt Lake City. Um, and John sat down. I was looking lonely at a table. I was like a wallflower, kind of in the corner of the room all by myself. And John's a socially compassionate guy and sat down and uh, I mean, I think I said, "What do you do?" And you said, "Oh, I'm the director of the Joseph Campbell Foundation." And like that was it. Then the house was on fire, and we talked for like 90 minutes. So super excited to have you on today, John. Um, let's talk a bit about what you do, what you have done, who you are. First of all, you're a creative. Tell me about some of your creative projects, past and present.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, Dave, really good to be on with you. I couldn't believe how quickly you and I found common ground and bonded. In conversation, we just were interested in so many of the same things, and um, I have long been a creative in my life. When I was in my 20s, I went to school, film school, so I learned how to tell stories, through the lens of cinema. But I quickly also learned that my greater interest was really in storytelling as a art form, no matter what form it took. I was interested in storytelling, and the more that I looked at storytelling, the more I learned about myself, and I eventually learned that really my greater interest in storytelling was in making sense of the world, making meaning out of everything that I encountered, and so um, that has kind of been my north star in guiding light. Is um, how do we tell stories to make sense of the world around us? And that, by the way, is I describe myself as a mythologist, and that's what I mean by that is, um, a lot of people hear the word myth and they think, oh, these are things that are not true, lies or
Mhm.
falsehoods. Um, for me, the myths are the stories we use to make sense of the world around us. And so I spent about 20 years in Hollywood working in film and television, and in storytelling and in that vein, and working in script writing and story consulting and all those types of things. And but I also worked in graphic novels and comic books, and that led me to just developing a much deeper interest in story, and I became fascinated with the mechanics of story, and the motifs, and how story works around the world and different cultures. And I kind of set my entertainment industry career aside for a while to go and just study this. And I went and got a PhD in mythology and depth psychology. And that's the intersection of what I'm interested in, which is the
Yeah,
stories, and then how we make sense of those stories.
making sense of the world around us. Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's kind of what brought me to the work that I do. And I now have this really interesting life where I don't necessarily have I serve as the director of the Joseph Campbell Foundation, but my life is very much not a job description, but like an ecosystem of work, and
Mhm.
there are times that I'm very focused on preserving and protecting the work of Joseph Campbell, and furthering that out into the world. And for those that don't know, just the 30-second version of who Joseph Campbell was, he was basically a scholar, a teacher at Sarah Lawrence College that wrote a number of books, and he wrote one in 1949 called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. and it was not meant to be a prescriptive book on how to tell a story, but it was a descriptive book on what he had observed in myths and stories and folklore around the world, and that there seemed to be these reoccurring patterns. And he never used the term the hero's journey in the book, but later people started referring to it as the hero's journey, and he kind of came around and adopted and said, "Yeah, the hero's journey." But it's basically, if you've ever seen a story of the idea of someone that leaves their normal world and home, and they go out on in search of something, run into all sorts of trials and tribulations, eventually get that something, and then bring it back to their home community where they started. That's the hero's journey in a nutshell. And he was the person that popularized that. Guy named George Lucas came across that book when he was trying to write a movie called Star Wars that some people are familiar with. And,
Yep.
it was very influential on him for, creating Star Wars. And it's been influential for a lot of creatives. But that's kind of the nutshell of who Joseph Campbell was. And, the work that I find myself intertwined. But my interest in that is still around using stories to make sense of the world around us.
Yeah. I love that formulation, and I think that's so it's sort of fractal. Like at multiple levels, we have to have stories to make sense of the world around us. Like down to the smallest. If you think about oh shoot, the Chris Nolan film where the scenes are backwards.
Oh yeah, yeah. Memento.
Yeah, I was thinking, I know it's not Inception.
Yeah, right.
Where Guy Pearce has lost his ability to make short-term memories. And so which is wonderfully simulated by us seeing the scenes of the movie backwards, right? And which makes the whole thing a baffling mystery, right? And he's trying to leave messages to himself in writing and in tattoos, and the absence of a story leads him to go tragically, violently wrong, right? Because he literally doesn't understand his inability to have a story that says where did I come from? Why am I here? Where am I going? What am I going to do? He does not know, and therefore all of his reactions are blind, right? And because he's in like a situation surrounded by violent and armed men, he ends up doing bad things. Um, it's sort of a terrific, right? Like at the smallest level, if I don't have if I don't have a story, I don't have identity, right? My identity is a function of what I have done and why I have done it and who was on the journey with me and was I pushing against something, you know.
Yep, that's it. I mean, identity and story to me are so intertwined. I have a friend that says that he believes story is the operating system of the human brain. That
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that we sort of, every interaction we have, I live in Los Angeles, and a lot of times I'm driving in traffic, someone cuts me off in traffic. I immediately form a story about that person. I
Yeah,
all sorts of crazy things about, oh, they probably weren't raised well. They might be the kind of person that kicks their dog, just terrible things,
right.
that I create stories around what type of person, that is. And that has served us well as human beings, right? We have formed stories about groups
Yep.
that we say, you know what, those are people that are on my side, and maybe we
Hmm.
could band together and we could find food together, and we can accomplish things together. And so
Yep.
there's I think a lot of value to the way that I think we've survived as a species because we do use stories to make sense of the world around us. My concern of recent times
Yeah.
has been our loss of shared stories, because we for
Yeah.
thousands of years have operated as a society based on some key shared stories about the nature of reality and the nature of the way that the world works. And there was lots of room for a certain amount of diversity,
Yep.
in
Yep.
those stories. But we really hit a climax, I think, of this in the sort of golden age of television. the guys, that are our age will remember the, final episode of the TV show MASH. Something like 3 out of every 4 people in the United States tuned in to watch that show. Like it was a
Crazy.
shared story, right?
Yeah.
We now there's only one shared story that I think we still are holding on to, and it's the Super Bowl. Like people still tune in to watch a shared story in real time unfold, and there's heroes and villains, and there's hand-to-hand combat, and it feels very ancient to me that this is the one shared story that we no matter how much we may disagree about really divisive issues, you
Yeah.
go to somewhere and watch the Super Bowl, and if you're cheering for the same team, you are willing to put all of those issues aside, to root on your team. So
Yeah.
I'm thankful for that shared story that we still have, but I'm deeply concerned about our world and the loss of shared stories, because I think those are the things that have kept us moving forward as human beings. That I think our survival is dependent on a certain amount of shared storytelling.
Yeah. That's interesting. And again, I think this is I fully agree. I think this is sort of the phenomenon is fractal, meaning the sort of the pattern exists at every level. Like the further, no matter how far down you go, there's still stories to make sense. No matter how far you pull out, you're seeing stories. So, and I think we're seeing erosion of stories at multiple levels, right? So that might be like, you might see it or you might worry about it only at like one level, right? You might, for example, you might think about it as like a civics problem.
Right.
So I know Richard Dreyfuss has done a lot of sort of campaigning to try to restore civics education, right? Um, and because there's a concern that we don't have um, a shared narrative about about the country.
Right.
Where did the country come from? What is its purpose? Who are we? What are we trying to do? Where are we going? We have multiple narratives.
Yes.
Um, and 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 some of that is political, right?
Sure. Yeah.
People, I think and this is true of advertisers and all kinds of, it's not just political parties, but there's value in identifying an enemy,
Right.
right?
Right.
I can focus people's attention. You can get those Pepsi guys, we're Coke,
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah.
Um, and so to some extent, people have uh, wanted to break up the big stories to
Yeah.
get more energy in their downline, in their tribe, right? To get out to vote, to
Right.
buy the product,
Right.
right?
Right.
But the casualty is we don't have shared stories to tell us who we are
Well,
or how we should handle things.
yeah, and to that point, Dave, I feel like that, I'm as concerned as anybody about, the divisive nature of politics and things in our
Sure.
country. I like to even zoom out further. And
Okay.
I I I really started being concerned a number of years ago about our loss of shared stories around the nature of space. Now, I don't mean outer space. I mean the idea of
Okay.
spatial existence. And let me
Hmm.
unpack it for a second for you.
Yeah.
I for a number of years, in our world, and I would say even for thousands of years, we sort of had some shared stories around the nature of space and the meanings of space. So I had a place that I went to that I did my work, and then I would come home at the end of the day, and there was no way to really take any of that work home with me. If I were
Yeah.
out in the field and I were, harvesting crops, when I went home, at the end of the day to eat and sleep, there's no way to take those crops back back into
Right.
the house, right? It was you left that work out on the field, literally.
Right.
Um, but we've kept evolving in our relationship with space, where we got to a point where, you know what? a lot of this work is put on paper, and the paper could be put in briefcases and taken home, and we could start to, and it began to confuse the relationship we had with the space that was our home. Even in my home now, I'm sitting in my office, and I've really tried to be very deliberate about what I do in this space that is different from what I do in the kitchen space, that's very
Interesting.
different than what I do in the living room or the bedroom or some other
Yeah.
space. But I'll tell you what really, to me, demolished our relationship with space, and it's this little device right here. Suddenly, when we had, cell phones and smartphones specifically come along, smartphones allowed me to completely demolished my relationship with space. Now I can bring my work with me anywhere in the world. It used to be I'd have to go to a beach for a vacation. Now I can go to the beach on vacation and bring my work
It
right
still work.
with me. It's still work, right? We used to have what we would call sacred spaces, right?
Hmm.
Where we
Sure.
would have churches and temples and places that we would go together that were sacred, and we still have certainly a good bit of that, which I'm heavy in favor of. By the way, I
Sure.
think we need sacred spaces, and they're very important to who we are as human beings. But I think the nature of sacred space as a global culture has begun to become rocky, because now when you go to somewhere like I've been to Europe and visited these amazing cathedrals and places, and
Yeah.
everyone in
Yeah.
there has their cell phone out and they're taking photos and video,
Yeah.
and they're trying to somehow capture that space to take with them. There's not a
Yeah.
sense that this is the sacred space. Everything I am here to get, I should get here. So I think our relationship with space has really affected the shared stories, because we've lost the meaning of this is work, this is home, this is sacred space, and now everywhere online is free range, which is why so many people go onto social media and kick their feet up on the furniture and act like they're at home, rather than acting like they're in a public forum having a
Right.
conversation with another person. I don't know if that
Right.
resonates with you.
It does, and let me just like throw out maybe another kind of fractal iteration of the sort of same space confusion. Um, I was at I guess it's man, I was gonna say recently, but it's like been 2 years or something. I went to the Cahokia Mounds in East St. Louis, Illinois, which, if anyone doesn't know, this was a metropolis in about 1000 AD, which of course meant it had like 10 or 20,000 people, right? But it was at the time probably the biggest city, I think, north of the Rio Grande or something like that.
Yeah.
Of course, European settlers, we weren't super interested in mounds for a good long time, so we just like put highways right through them, knocked them down, plowed them right. But nevertheless, here some of these mounds remain, and they are obviously artificial, gigantic pyramids of dirt. They are
Yes.
amazing.
Yes.
And uh, uh, you give yourself self-guided tours. There's QR codes, and you go around, right? And like this is it's so the spatial confusion extends to confusing the spaces of the living with the spaces of the dead, right? And again, I think you're right. The phone is a it's meant as a tool, but it's a kind of a tether, and it says the stuff that comes on this phone is going to invade everywhere, right? And it makes every place the same. And that sounds great if it means I can access a encyclopedia or whatever wherever I want. But like fundamentally, it means no place is special.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's a loss for us. It's a loss of a shared story of what is special and what's not, And
Yeah,
again, I'm not anti-technology. I'm quite pro-technology. I like that we have tools, and I like that,
sure,
on a hot summer
sure.
day I can turn the air conditioner on. I like these things, but I do think that when every when nothing becomes special anymore, we it used to be you would have to go to those mounds
Right,
the only way to see them was to go there. Then we developed photography, and someone could take a photo of them and you could see that and feel like you were there. And then we developed video, and then we've now everything live streamed. But I do think there's a loss of our presence, you know, fully being present somewhere when nothing is able to poke through that bubble. I'll tell you, I've been to 2 events in the last 6 months that, I was asked, to put my phone in this technology called a Yonder pouch, and so they gave
Okay.
it to you at the event, and basically it had some sort of lock on it. You put your phone in it, and you carried the pouch around with you, but it was locked. You couldn't open it up, and then when the event was done, they hit some magic button and the pouch opened and you could get your phone out, um, but it was amazing to be among in one of these events among thousands of people that no one had their phone out doing anything. They were having conversations with each other. They were fully present, you know, in the moment. And you know that so many of our ancient traditions in the world are trying to get us back to that idea of having some transcendence of that which is around us and connect to something larger than just ourselves, which again I think is one of the most important things we can do is human beings is connecting with presence, with something larger than ourselves, you know, and that
Yeah.
for some people, you know, that comes through even a 12-step program. You know, the 12
Sure,
step
sure.
programs, you have to give yourself over to the fact that there's something in the world more powerful than you, uh
Yeah,
you know, to do that. And I think that sort of shared story has been transformational in people's lives, and when we lose it, I'm concerned for us, you know? I'm
yeah.
concerned for us.
There's two kind of observations. One, I mean, I don't think when you're talking about connecting with sort of things that are greater than yourselves. You're not talking about systematic theology. There's a great story Joseph Campbell told about being at I think it was a Shinto temple and seeing priests dance, and he said something like, right, something like, oh, tell me about your theology, and he says, we don't have theology, we dance,
It's
right?
that's
Which is just a wonderful sort of for Westerners who to say, oh man, there are lots of ways to encounter the infinite, that which is greater than ourselves, right? I love that this is interesting. We didn't when we at the Dignity Summit we didn't talk about space, but I love this. I love this perception of yours because story creates space. Story is also divided by bounded by space, right? Or defined by space. So in the journey of the hero with a thousand faces, right? The in a sense, it's all a story about space. The village is ill. Something is wrong
right.
with the space. The hero, receives a call. There's a strange message. There's a peculiar messenger. There's whatever it is, which takes him across a border into a different space, which is dangerous and strange, and things are exaggerated. And he has to defeat enemies. He becomes wounded. Maybe he then at the very bottom he has some kind of fantastic encounter. This is sometimes characterized as like the marriage with the goddess, right? But that's again at a difference. You're in hell or something, right? You're in and this transforms him so that he's able to come home. And then coming home, he again changes. He now has the power to change the village, to heal the village, right? So we think about it as a story about the hero, but it's a story about spaces too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%. And I think we see this in so many different uh, traditions and faiths and beliefs and practices where, we have this idea. There's this word we use in conversations around story and meaning. There's two different words. There's the word catabasis and the word Nakia, and both of them sort of refer to an underworld journey of some sort. And oftentimes we uh, we see this in a quite literal sense, like the Greeks told the story of Persephone, who's abducted by Hades and taken down, and she goes on this underworld journey. The Babylonians told this story of Inanna, who his husband is captured and taken. She goes down on this underworld journey. But then also, we see this in the traditions from that revolve around biblical texts, where we see Christ crucified and going down for 3 days in hell, on this underworld journey. We see
Yeah.
in the First Testament, we see Jonah in the belly of the whale, and this is a sort of underworld journey. But then, like on a psychological level, we all recognize that all of us go through these underworld journeys where we feel like we're in this subterranean psychological space. We could even say that human beings going through puberty is sort of an underworld journey that you come out on the other side of, transformed. And
Yeah.
that, I think, speaks to this relationship with space, and how space is so key to our own transformation and our own transcendence of that around us. Space is important.
Yeah. That's super interesting. And I've been doing a lot of reading about the Greco-Roman and the Egyptian mysteries recently,
Yeah.
right? And it's super interesting to think that at some point in the West, we really leaned into kind of rational philosophical theology. I want to make theological statements, and I can say A and also B and therefore C, and we debate each other about this stuff. And I think when we, to the extent that, because I don't think it's 100%, but to the extent that we walked away from sacred drama, where instead of having systematic theology, we did something more like the dance. We participated, right? And uh, we went down, with Orpheus to try and get Eurydice back, and we failed, but we came, or I mean, you use the example of Persephone, but the mysteries at Eleusis, right? Is we participated in whatever capacity as one of the minor gods to, and we saw her abduction and Demeter going after recovering her, and the final deal that struck with Hades, and people didn't seem to have come out of there with articulated instruction. They came out of there with visions. They were called epoptes. They had seen something. They
Yes.
participated in a story. We're not even sure what they saw. They saw something, but it changed them, right?
Yes.
And they all saw the same thing. And people would come every year, hundreds of miles, to go do this thing to become one of the epoptes. And I feel like we made a bad bargain. I
Agree.
feel like we gave up community and we gave up a shared thing, and in favor of argument.
Agreed.
Um,
There's a lot of different ways people have approached this thing that we've given up. There was a guy a number of years ago named Leonard Shlain that wrote a book called The Alphabet and the Goddess, and it was very much about how we were we were a certain type of human being before we invented the alphabet. And
Interesting.
this very much changed our relationship, especially with memory, because before we had a way of writing down things, to remember
Yeah.
them, everything was memorized, right? And
Yep. Yep.
if you knew something, that was the only way. And then it became especially essential in who you would mentor to pass on ideas, because if you died, those ideas are just lost, right? They're not written down. And so, um, don't get me wrong, I'm pro technology. I'm glad we came
True.
up with a way to write things down.
You're in favor of writing.
I'm in favor of writing, but we also, with everything we gain, we also lose something in that process.
Yes.
And I think we lost what you're talking about with this embodied experience
Yep.
with transcendence. And we can put a lot of names on that: ground of being, or whatever, God. Um, but I think we did lose some connection when it no longer became essential that we had to be embodied in this relationship, that we could pass these ideas along it to someone else, and they say, well, so and so, wrote and said this. I've never met that person, but they had this experience, and there's power to that. There's wonderful power to that.
Sure.
And there's something that is essential for that personal experience with these things, that we somehow have had an encounter, of
Right.
the sort.
Right. Yeah, 100%. I think, I mean, this is almost a little bit of an aside. I mean, I think we also, um, Plato in a couple of his dialogues complains about writing weakening the memories of human beings,
Yes.
right? And there are the classical orators. Cicero was on his De Oratore, I think, is one who writes about it. There used to be arts for memorizing vast amounts of information. And and again, and this is not like, I don't think this is a conversation is like a rant about smartphones, but actually, like, we are replacing capacities that we used to develop in ourselves
Right.
with crutches,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We used to develop techniques for the classical orators. The example was you could get up and you could speak for hours at a time, and it wasn't extemporaneous. It was that you had memorized the speech using a visualization technique.
That's right.
Um,
I don't know more
and
than 3 phone numbers of anybody that I know, and I remember when I was young, I used to have maybe dozens of phone numbers
oh
memorized,
yeah,
you know?
yeah. Hilariously, I can remember some of my phone numbers from the 80s, but like I don't know my children's phone numbers. This is true, right? But they're worse than me because they go to school and they're basically taught how to index,
Yeah,
right? Like they are not really required to memorize things.
right.
Or embody them, like in handwriting. I None of my kids was taught cursive,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Speaking of like embodiment, right? So we have this detached sort of brain focus, but the brain doesn't even have to memorize things. It's just a brain to perform functions, and it's a brain that's learning how to manipulate some tools.
that's it, that's it. So, that this comes back to, I think, embodied shared stories where we, have long for thousands of years, there were relationships between the brain and the muscles and the hands and the arms and the legs, that I wonder if, human beings will eventually, those muscles will atrophy,
Yeah,
eventually, because we no longer will use them. Um, and maybe, maybe that's okay. Maybe it's fine. I don't plan on
sure.
being around for that, so I don't know.
Right.
But um,
Someone else's problem.
someone else's problem. But I do think that we really make a mistake when we can't at least bring awareness around the decisions that we're making.
Sure.
I was talking to someone earlier today about storytelling, and we
Yeah.
were talking about one of the essentials in storytelling is for your character to uh, be able to make decisions, because really stories are about, no one really likes a story about a victim that just all this stuff happens to them,
Sure.
just thrown to and fro. We like stories about people that make decisions,
Yep.
even if it's a huge mistake and it all goes wrong. Especially if it all goes wrong, we love those stories. But I think we, have often tried to put ourselves as human beings increasingly in positions where we make fewer and fewer decisions. We want to decrease risk at every turn. And I think if we're not bringing some awareness around what we're doing there, we lose something,
Yeah.
And I really believe that's one of the big things that stories can do, is they can remind us of the wisdom that we have had previously, that
Yeah.
maybe we've forgotten.
No, that's 100%. I 100% agree. And it's also wisdom that we didn't have to ourselves personally earn, right? A story embodies something that not even my grandparents or someone 1,000 years ago learned, and it's embodied in the story and passed down to me. So we can have a greater trove of experiences than we're capable of actually having ourselves.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
I and to get back to some of sort of the some of the sort of the main, what I take to be the main thread, right? We haven't even talked about canon culturally. We talked a little bit about it sort of in terms like a civics manner, right? But um, there is there was until a few decades ago a consensus, broad, rough, approximate consensus in the West, right, of like the books that you had to have read to be an educated person, and and uh, and I mean, I remember I've always felt insecure about my own education. I remember Harold Bloom published a book called The Western Canon circa 1995 or something.
Yeah.
And I bought a copy because I said, I forget about what the book says. I want the appendix. So I got it for like $3 at the Strand, the remaindered copies in New York. And I went to the appendix and just tried to just systematically start reading. I think it started with the Greek tragedians
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
something, right? So I'm like, all right, Sophocles, here we go.
Oh,
Um, and uh and like big chunks of that were sort of the classics, Greco-Roman writers and the Bible, but there's plenty of others. Like I'm pretty sure Enuma Elish was in there, and obviously a lot more recent stuff. And um I I fear that a in the academy there's probably a lot less consensus than there used to be that even a canon is meaningful or what should be in the canon.
right.
I also think, as a practical matter, whatever the Academy thinks, people by and large are just not aware of or interested in or trying to. I think there's a general belief, right,
Yes.
that I probably should read Huck Finn and Moby Dick or
Right.
whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Um, which means we don't have shared stories.
Well, that's it. That's the thing. And I really feel that we lose something when we begin to we have this terrible tendency to throw the baby out with the bathwater
Sure,
when it comes
sure,
to a lot of these issues. And I strongly feel that everyone should should read Aristotle and should understand. I think everybody should read Euripides, too. And to
sure.
that matter, I think everyone, should read the story of Ishtar and Anna. And so many. This is not about trying to create a Eurocentric or Western focus. This is about what are the oldest writings we have, and
Yeah.
so many traditions around the world. Um, they were oral traditions, and
Mhm.
they were not focused on writing these things down. And we honestly just don't know. I would
Yeah.
love to know what the wisdom of sub-Saharan Africa and
Oh,
I
100%.
would love to know. Would love to know. But they were an oral culture. They didn't write these things, down. So I don't think we throw things out, because we say, well, we need a more well-rounded. I agree. Let's have a more well-rounded, but if we're going to go back as far as we can and see what our most ancient wisdom is that we have access to, we know what that is. And I think everyone should, have a grasp of that. I will say, there's also a lot that it can be gained by having shared stories that we agree, okay, let's all say these stories are important. And I'm not even as concerned about, if we switch out this book out of the canon for this book or whatever, if there is uh strong discussion around it. Like
Yeah.
if we're having, for example, we may find something that is discovered in what is now Argentina. And we may say, oh my word, we've just discovered this. It was in a cave in Argentina. This is far
Right.
older. Oh my word, add that to the canon,
Right.
immediately. It's not about trying to keep anyone out. It's about, not putting our modern preference lenses, I think, on what the whole of human history has been able to contribute and offer to us, through
Yeah.
history.
Yeah. Yeah. I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. And I would be, man, if next season they're digging in Çatalhöyük in Turkey and they find a text they can read, I'm
Yeah,
going to be the first guy in line. I want to see it,
me too.
right?
Me too.
Um, the my concern is there's no, practically speaking, there's no canon, or there are some sort of lonely defenders. In fact, for years I thought, man, practically speaking, what's happening is the Walt Disney Corporation is becoming the keeper of the canon. That's the thing that everybody is seeing, the stories they all know. Uh, I'm not even sure that's true anymore, right? Like the proliferation of streaming channels, the way that the cost of production is coming down for books and also films and music. Anyone can tell a story, which is amazing, but that means everybody is telling stories. And right, the electronic platforms means distribution is basically free, and you can pick very customized. If what you love reading is monster romances, you can sign up for Amazon KDP and you can read a new monster romance, Monster Milking Farm or whatever it is, every day for the rest of your life, right?
Yeah.
Um and I think AI risks making it worse because you can actually just tell an AI to tell you stories that are customized to you,
Just what
right?
I want. Just what I want.
Just what I want.
Yeah.
I'm the hero. I get to be on the monster milking farm.
Well,
So,
that's so good, Dave. I think you're onto something with that we've got to be careful of, that we are not just all creating these sort of masturbatory literature projects that are just about us. I tell you, I have tried 3 times to read Ulysses by James Joyce.
oh yeah.
Whew. I,
Yep.
I'm going to give it a fourth run in 2026. I still have been unable to crack it, right? But also, I'm intentional to go and read it. If people haven't checked out the Mowindo epic, this is
Mm,
a West African oral tradition folk story about this character named Mowindo that only started being written down and translated like in the 1960s, 1970s. These researchers went and started writing these stories down. But I think if I'm never going to encounter the Mowindo epic or Ulysses if I ask AI to just create uh,
correct.
1,000 versions of Star Wars that I'm going to enjoy,
Correct.
you know? So
Correct.
we've got to sometimes, just like if I only eat ice cream my whole life, I'm not going to be very healthy. I'm going to, die. Um, Sometimes I think we need to approach literature like we approach diet. And you know what? You need some vegetables sometimes, and it's going to make you healthy. You're going to be the better for it to work some vegetables into your diet.
100%. I love your Ulysses example. We lived in London 5 years. I moved there about 3 months before my wife did. Okay, so I was alone in a little flat in Southwest London for 3 months, and I literally said, "You know what? I was on this. I had this Harold Bloom thing. I was still working through it. So I read two things
Yeah.
during those 3 months. One was Ulysses, and I did it by gum. I do not feel any need to reread it. I was like, I understand. I respect the ambition.
Yep.
I
Yep.
understand how much craft is in it. I just don't care. I don't. This is not. I don't enjoy this. But okay, like I get it.
Yeah.
Um, but then the other thing was Paradise Lost, and I
Yeah.
was like, "Oh, this is amazing!" It was one of those moments where I was like, it was like discovering Nick Cave. It was like, "Oh, I would not have imagined this existed, but now that I see it, it's at the interstices where obviously something had to exist here." You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and it was terrific. I've jotted down the Moendo epic. I'm gonna go check it out.
Yeah.
This is speaking about sometimes letting our momentary politics obscure things,
Yeah.
right? One of the things that I read to my kids was the Uncle Remus tales,
Yeah.
and which can be challenging. Because so if viewers are not immediately familiar, I'm going to get details wrong here, but post Civil War,
Yeah.
an Atlanta newspaperman named Joel Chandler Harris collected a bunch of stories written by freedmen, by former slaves of the South. And and uh, these were made into Disney's Song of the South movie, right? Which is difficult to find a copy of now. And I'm not interested in talking about Song of the South specifically, but but the thing about the Uncle Remus story, first of all, they're hilarious, especially if you're like me and your accents are terrible and you're reading them to your kids. And like I read Brer Rabbit, and my kids were just laughed until they could not breathe
Yeah.
when Brer Rabbit saying, "Throw me back into the don't throw me into the briar patch, whatever you do, Brer Wolf." Um, there has been,
On Brer Rabbit for a second, just because I think that
oh
it's
yeah,
important. Brer Rabbit, this, by the way, in West African traditions, we've got these Anansi stories, right? These Anansi stories of the spider. We see Brer Rabbit, in these West African stories, and so these stories then that freed men were sharing at this time, that again were part of the oral tradition. This is actually part of the West African culture that it would we don't want to lose, right? We don't want
right.
to lose. So anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
No, no, no. This is exactly it. This is exactly where I'm going, right? Is that there's like a West African folktale element recognizable in these stories, right? And so I understand people feel uncomfortable with the way that some of the dialect can be written down or whatever, right? Because like this was the era of blackface. It was decades after this that people got uncomfortable with the whole minstrel tradition, right? So this was almost 200 years, 130 some, 165 years ago. So I get that it's a little uncomfortable, but like the problem is if we don't read the stories, who is being silenced is not Joel Chandler Harris, the Atlanta newspaper man, right? It's the freedmen. It's the black people who were telling these stories. And what I would like, what I would, I don't, there is no official canon. I don't know what the University of Chicago is making its freshmen read. But if like it were me, if I were teaching English, I would absolutely, I'd be like, here's the Uncle Remus tales. Yes, you're gonna read, whatever. But like also this, you can go read Brer Rabbit, go read a couple stories, give them some context so we understand what are the filters this is coming through, um, and let's celebrate the stories of these people who survived slavery, right?
I mean, I think this is true of, I think, Mark Twain is being, taken out of a lot of educational programs, as well. And
Yeah,
I, I think, I think we owe it to, the world in many ways um, to discuss these things. Like let's not shy away from, yeah, let's talk about racism at the time that this is being is happening, and let's just have a conversation about it. And I think that's what is often really being lost, in our culture, is us being willing to have difficult conversations. So much easier to sweep things under the rug, to pretend like things don't exist.
yeah,
uh
yep.
I
To be offended, to assign this is your version,
Right,
you're lying, you're fake news, right?
right, right,
Here's the true story of what happened.
right, yeah. And that's it, when it comes to historical things, and this is one of the reasons I gravitate towards myth as opposed to history, is where history is so concerned about trying to get the right order of facts in place, and actually what happened. Myth is so not concerned about the facts of something, uh because there's 100 versions of every myth. In this myth Zeus does this, and in this one he does the opposite, and who knows what. It doesn't matter which one is true. And I think with history we can recognize, yeah, there's a lot of people that existed at one different time, and we should understand a variety of different perspectives around this without having to uh choose one. without becoming binary of like, okay, this is the 100% right, history of this time frame, and this is what's wrong. And I want to be clear here, because I realize we're talking about sensitive things, and people can read the
Sure,
wrong things into what we're saying
sure,
here.
sure,
I i hate racism. I hate,
sure, 100%.
yeah, I am against any sort of
Sure,
privileging one person over another. I
sure.
want to be clear about that. I think it's we've become very worried and fearsome, though, of having conversations in this area that again, I think we end up throwing sometimes the baby out with the bathwater
Yeah.
in this
Well, I mean,
situation.
Huck Finn is maybe an example, right? I mean, Mark Twain was an abolitionist, right? And the point, a very big part of the point of the story of Huck Finn is that Jim is a human being. Jim is a man. He is not a caricature, you know? Um, yeah, I 100% agree. And you know, if I disagree with somebody, it can be worth thinking about, all right, what is their myth? Again,
Exactly.
not meaning their lie. What is the story that gives meaning,
That's right.
right? And what is it really telling them, right? What is like why is this valuable to them? You
Absolutely.
know,
Absolutely.
uh I yeah. So even where our stories are fragmented, being sophisticated to about stories. I mean, this is kind of the thing you were saying earlier, the story you tell yourself about the guy that cut you off, right?
Right.
There's a uh Utah, where I live, has thrown out a whole bunch of corporate training over the last 50 years. One of the local guys here, they did a thing called Crucial Conversations, and this is what it was really all about,
Yeah.
is realizing what's the story that I'm telling myself that makes me mad. Is there a different story I could tell myself that would be more useful in getting
Yes.
through this difficult, conversation with somebody?
That's it, Dave. And I think when it comes back to sort of this canon discussion, um, I, I love that, like, this podcast we're on is we don't have to come up with sound bites. We can take an
Sure.
hour to really unpack this, because some of these things are nuanced and complex, and we need to be able to unpack them. And
Yeah.
our world is a microwave culture that doesn't lend itself to that. I would love to see with canon, a well represented group of people that can come together and make their case for why different things should be in canon, and let's find what we all can agree on, is canon. I
Yeah.
don't mean like rule by committee, where we have, just the lowest common denominator of a committee, but I think there's a lot of reasonable people um that can come to something that doesn't represent, the lowest common denominator, and that we can read challenging things and hard things. And as human beings, if we want to keep this planet going and keep ourselves going on this planet, I think we're going to have a bigger appetite for challenge, and not just that which makes us uncomfortable in the future.
I totally agree. I man, as humans, there are some basic challenges we have that I just don't think are going to go away, right? One of them is death, but like another one is consciousness, right? I am a universe over here, and I'm pretty sure you're a universe over there. And how do I bridge the gulf between, right? And story is, I think, the basic tool, and it's very powerful to have shared stories. So I think um, um, we haven't talked much about the phrase story crisis, and it's like you got a hard stop, so we're not going to now. Um, but we face a challenging time, I think,
I do.
for story.
All of this we're talking about, I think, is this story crisis that we're facing, and that is this loss of shared stories that even outside of the realm of what we might decide is canon or not canon, the shared stories about what is good and evil in the world. I find discussions happening in our current world that greatly concern me. Discussions I never thought I would witness happening about
Sure.
what is good and what is evil. And to be fair, yeah, throughout history, there's been a lot of discussions around what is good and what is evil. But I think the important thing is one that we keep discussing these things in some sort of civil way with each other without demonizing each other, and two, that we don't try and take shortcuts in these discussions, that we are willing to put in the hard work, do the hard work, have the hard discussions so that we can um, figure out how all of us can move forward. And we can't do that if we are constantly in the business of deciding who is on my team and who's not, and how do we defeat
The
someone.
other side. Yeah. John, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me. If people wanted to find you on the internet, where would you point them?
Absolutely. I have a website, tellingabetterstory.com. You can find all my socials and all the different places to connect with me right there.
Wonderful, John. Thank you very much. And for those of you who've been watching, thank you also. And remember, the humans win in the end.